No nanny lasted with the vampire king's wild heirs until a broke single mom did the impossible. They don't want a mother, Mrs. Rosecliffe, the woman whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering over cold stone. She didn't look up from the ledger, her quill scratching a rhythmic warning against the parchment. They want a victim, the last nanny left in the middle of the night without her shoes. The one before her, she simply stopped speaking. Madeline Rosecliffe tightened her grip on her frayed handbag, feeling the outline of her last $10 bill through the worn leather. I'm not afraid of children, Madame Kingswell, and I cannot afford to be afraid of ghosts. The old woman finally looked up, eyes sharp as fractured glass. It isn't the ghosts you should fear, child. It is the king, and the winter he carries in his blood. The bus ride to the edge of the Iron Shore territories had been a rattling cage of metal and stale heat, but the silence that greeted Madeline when she stepped off was absolute. The world here wasn't just cold, it was devoid of colour. The sky was a bruised shade of violet, hanging low over a landscape swallowed by relentless, pristine snow. Ironshore Manor did not sit upon the hill. It loomed, a jagged scar of obsidian stone against the white horizon. Turrets pierced the clouds like spears, and the surrounding forest of ancient pines stood like a silent army, their branches bowed under the weight of winter. Madeline shivered, pulling her thin coat tighter. It was a coat meant for city rain, not this primal biting frost. She checked her pocket again, a nervous tic she had developed over the last 6 months of poverty. The letter of employment was there, crinkled and damp. It was a golden ticket that felt more like a death warrant. But for a single mother with an eviction notice nailed to her heart, fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. The walk up the winding drive took 20 minutes. By the time she reached the colossal iron gates, her breath was coming in painful, shallow clouds. The gates groaned open without being touched, a mechanical or perhaps magical welcome that sent a prickle of unease down her spine. Inside, the manor was a cavern of shadows and velvet. The air smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and something sharper, pine resin and musk. "You are late." The voice came from the top of the grand staircase. Theodora Kingswell descended, a woman who looked as though she had been carved from the same grey stone as the castle. She wore a high-collared black dress that rustled like dead grass. This was the keeper of the keys, the woman who had warned her over the phone, and again in the hook of her mind. The bus, the snow was deeper than expected, Madeline stammered, hating the tremor in her voice. "Excuses are the currency of the weak, Mrs. Rosecliffe," Theodora said, stopping 3 steps from the bottom. She towered over Madeline. "Maxwell Ironshore does not tolerate weakness, nor do his children." "I am not weak," Madeline said, her chin lifting. It was a reflex, a survival mechanism honed by months of pleading with landlords and dodging debt collectors. "I am necessary. You said yourself, no one else would take the placement." Theodora's eyes narrowed, assessing. She saw the frayed cuffs, the hollows under Madeline's cheekbones, the desperate set of her shoulders. Desperation often masquerades as courage. We shall see which one you possess. She led Madeline through corridors lined with portraits of men with hard eyes and wolves at their heels. The locals whispered that Maxwell Ironshore was a vampire, a creature who drank life and despised the sun. But as Madeline looked at the paintings, she saw no fangs. She saw rage. She saw loneliness. She saw men who looked less like aristocrats and more like predators trapped in silk. "The terms are simple," Theodora recited, pushing open a heavy oak door. "You are to manage the twins, Lucas and Era. You are to ensure they are fed, educated, and kept out of the West Wing. You are never to disturb King Maxwell when the study doors are closed, and you are to lock your door at night, for your own peace of mind." The room offered was grand but austere, a four-poster bed, a cold hearth, and a window overlooking the Black Forest. Mr. Frederick Wolfton, the King's adviser, will brief you on the legalities tomorrow, Theodora said, turning to leave. Supper is at 7. The children eat in the nursery. Do not expect the King to join you. He has not dined with the household since the Queen passed. Wait, Madeline called out. What about the children? What are they like? Theodora paused, her hand on the brass knob. A flicker of something like pity crossed her severe face. They are Ironshaws, Mrs. Rosecliffe. They are half storm, half heartbreak. Good luck. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. Madeline sank onto the bed, the mattress stiff and unyielding. She closed her eyes, picturing her own daughter, safely staying with her sister 3 towns over. For you, Lily, she thought. I will walk into the den of wolves for you. She didn't know how literal that thought would become. The nursery was located on the 3rd floor, a sprawling space that should have been bright and cheerful. Instead, the curtains were drawn tight, choking out the daylight, and the air was thick with a heavy, oppressive tension. Toys of exquisite craftsmanship, hand-carved wooden soldiers, porcelain dolls, intricate clockwork trains lay smashed and scattered across the floor like the debris of a war zone. Madeline stepped over a decapitated teddy bear. "Hello?" she called out softly. "Lucas? Era?" Silence answered her. Not the empty silence of a vacant room, but the held-breath silence of a hunter waiting in the brush. A low growl vibrated through the floorboards. Madeline froze. It wasn't human. It was deep, guttural, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated in the marrow of her bones. Slowly, she turned toward the corner where a massive wardrobe stood. On top of the wardrobe perched a creature. It was a boy, perhaps 7 years old, but his eyes were glowing circles of amber, and his teeth were bared in a snarl that was entirely too sharp for a human child. Beside him, huddled in the shadows, was a girl with hair like spun silver, watching with wide, terrified eyes. "Get out!" the boy, Lucas, hissed. He didn't just speak the words, he spat them. "We don't want you! We'll eat you!" Madeline's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Wolf shifters. The rumors were wrong about the vampires, but they were right about the monsters. But looking at the boy, his knuckles white as he gripped the wood, the tear tracks cutting through the dust on his face, she didn't see a monster. She saw a cornered animal. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Instead, she did the impossible. She sat down on the floor, right in the middle of the broken toys, lowering her height, exposing her neck. "That seems like a lot of work," Madeline said calmly, smoothing her skirt. "Eating me, I mean. I'm mostly bones and cheap fabric. You'd get terrible indigestion." The growling stopped. The girl, Era, blinked. Lucas looked confused, his amber eyes flickering back to a dark hazel. You're not running," Lucas accused, though his voice wavered. "I'm tired of running," Madeline admitted, her voice soft. "And I imagine you're tired of scaring people away. It must be exhausting, having to be so frightening all the time." Era shifted, creeping forward. Miss Pringle screamed when Lucas showed his eyes. Miss Pringle evidently had very delicate sensibilities, Madeline said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 slightly squashed granola bars she had saved from her bus ride. "I, however, am made of tougher stuff. And I am hungry. Are you?" It was a truce offered in chocolate chips and oats. Lucas hesitated, the animal wildness receding, leaving just a hungry, lonely boy. He hopped down, moving with an eerie, fluid grace that no human child should possess. Just as his hand reached for the wrapper, the temperature in the room plummeted. The nursery doors banged open, slamming against the walls with the force of a thunderclap. In the doorway stood a man who eclipsed the light. He was massive, his shoulders filling the frame, clad in a charcoal suit that looked strained against his muscular build. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, swept back from a face that was devastatingly handsome and terrifyingly cold. Maxwell Ironshaw, the Alpha King. His eyes were not amber. They were the color of glaciers, blue and burning with ancient authority. He took in the scene, the broken toys, the children on the floor, the stranger sitting amidst the chaos. What is the meaning of this? His voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together deep underground. The children scrambled back, fear radiating off them in waves. Lucas hid the granola bar behind his back. Madeline stood up. Her legs felt like water, but she locked her knees. She forced herself to meet that glacial stare. "We were having a snack, Your Highness." Maxwell stepped into the room, and the air seemed to thin. He loomed over her, a physical force of nature. He smelled of deep winter and ozone. "You are the new warden." "Nanny," she corrected, her voice trembling only slightly. "My name is Madeline Rosecliffe." "They will break you, Mrs. Rosecliffe," Maxwell said, his gaze sliding over her with dismissive arrogance. "They have broken 4 trained governesses in a month. You look as though a strong wind would shatter you." "Then it is a good thing we are indoors," she retorted. Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. Frederick Wolfton, a lean man with spectacles and a nervous energy, appeared behind the king, looking horrified at her tone. Maxwell's eyes narrowed. For a second, the pupil dilated, not round, but vertical. Wolf-like. "Clean this mess," he commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. "And keep them silent. If I hear one scream, you will be on the snow before the echo fades." He turned on his heel and marched out, a king leaving his subjects in the dust. Madeline let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She looked down at the children. They weren't looking at the door. They were looking at her. "He hates us," Lucas whispered. Madeline knelt again, pulling a toy soldier from the wreckage. "No," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "He just doesn't know how to speak without roaring. We shall have to teach him." The first week was a war of attrition. The twins tested every boundary. They put snow in her bedsheets. They shifted into wolf pups and chewed the legs of the antique chairs. They hid on the roof during lessons. But Madeline didn't break. She cleaned the sheets. She replaced the chairs with sturdy cushions. She climbed onto the roof, terrified of heights, and read them poetry until they got bored and came down. She learned the rhythm of the house, the way the pipes groaned at midnight, the way the staff, led by the stoic Theodora, moved like ghosts, avoiding the West Wing where the king worked. But mostly, she learned about Maxwell. He was a phantom in his own home. He left before dawn to patrol the borders of his territory and returned late, smelling of blood and exhaustion. He never spoke to the children. He barely looked at them. It all came to a head on a Tuesday night. A storm had rolled in off the mountains, a blizzard that shook the foundations of Ironshaw Manor. The wind howled like a dying god, rattling the window panes. In the middle of the night, a scream tore through the nursery. Madeline was out of bed and running before she fully woke up. She burst into the children's room to find Era thrashing in her bed, caught in the throes of a night terror. The air around the little girl was crackling with uncontrolled magic. Frost was blooming rapidly across the headboard, freezing the wood, creeping toward the girl's skin. "Era! Wake up!" Madeline cried, rushing to her. "No! No, the cold!" Era screamed, her eyes squeezed shut. The frost was spreading fast, jagged spikes of ice forming in the air. Madeline reached for her, ignoring the biting cold that burned her skin. Suddenly, a massive hand grabbed Madeline's shoulder and yanked her back with bruising force. "Do not touch her!" Maxwell roared. He had appeared from the shadows, shirtless, his chest heaving. A long scar ran down his ribs, pale against the tan skin. "Her magic is unstable. It will freeze your blood." "She's hurting," Madeline shouted back, wrestling against his grip. The Alpha's strength was immovable, like iron bands. She needs to calm down on her own. If you touch her now, the shock could kill her. Maxwell's voice was panicked, stripped of its royal command. He looked at his daughter with utter helplessness. He was a king who could crush armies, but he was terrified of a crying child. "She doesn't need space, she needs her father," Madeline snapped. She twisted, stomping hard on Maxwell's bare foot. The king of the Ironshore pack grunted in surprise and loosened his grip. Madeline lunged forward. She didn't grab Ira, she enveloped her. She wrapped her arms around the freezing, thrashing child, pressing the girl's head to her chest. The cold was agonizing. It felt like hugging a block of dry ice. It burned through her thin nightgown, searing her skin. "It's okay," Madeline hummed, fighting the chatter of her teeth. "I've got you. The ice can't hurt us. We are the fire, Era. We are the fire." She began to sing. It wasn't a noble song of wolves or moon. It was a silly, simple lullaby she used to sing to Lily about a frog on a lily pad. Her voice was shaky, thin with pain, but it was steady. "Little green frog on a big green leaf." Maxwell stood frozen. He watched the frost creep onto Madeline's arms, turning her skin blue. He watched the human woman shivering violently, absorbing the magic that should have killed her. Slowly, Era's thrashing stopped. The magic recognized the warmth. The jagged ice began to recede, melting into harmless water that soaked the sheets. Era opened her eyes, gasping, and clung to Madeline. "Maddie?" she whimpered. "I'm here," Madeline whispered, her lips blue. "I'm right here." Only then did Madeline realize how cold she was. The room spun. Her knees gave way. She didn't hit the floor. Maxwell caught her. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, his body heat radiating like a furnace. He didn't look at Era. His focus was entirely on the woman shivering in his arms. "You foolish, reckless woman," he growled, but there was no bite in it. His voice was laced with something else. Wonder. He carried her not to her room, but to the large armchair by the dying fire. He sat, keeping her in his lap, pulling a fur throw from the back of the chair to wrap around them both. "Frederick," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the hall. "Bring warm water and brandy. Now!" Madeline leaned her head against his bare chest. She could hear his heart, a slow, powerful thrum that sounded like a war drum. It was terrifying. It was the safest sound she had ever heard. "You stayed," Maxwell murmured, his hand hesitating before awkwardly rubbing her arm to generate heat. "Why did you stay? You could have died." "A mother doesn't run from the cold, Your Highness," Madeline slurred, sleep dragging her under. "She becomes the heat." Maxwell looked down at her. For the first time in 5 years, the ice in his own chest cracked. He looked at his sleeping daughter. Then at the woman in his arms who defied every instinct of self-preservation he knew. "Maxwell," he said softly into the darkness. "My name," he whispered, resting his chin gently on the top of her head. "Call me Maxwell." But Madeline was already asleep, leaving the Wolf King awake to guard her dreams. The morning after the storm, the atmosphere in Ironshore Manor had shifted. It was subtle, like the change in air pressure before rain. But Madeline felt it. The staff met her eyes instead of looking through her. Theodora Kingswell actually nodded when Madeline entered the kitchen, a gesture that, from the stone-faced housekeeper, was equivalent to a standing ovation. But the biggest change was in the Alpha King. Maxwell didn't avoid the nursery. In fact, when Madeline brought Lucas and Era down for breakfast, a new rule she had instituted, ignoring Frederick's sputtering protests, Maxwell was already seated at the head of the colossal mahogany table. He didn't speak as they entered, but he didn't leave. He watched them over the rim of his coffee cup, his blue eyes tracking Madeline's movements as she settled the twins. Porridge again, Lucas grumbled, though he lacked his usual venom. He eyed his father warily. Oats build strength, Madeline said briskly, pouring milk. And if you want to learn to shift without knocking over furniture, you need muscle, not just enthusiasm. Maxwell lowered his cup. The clink against the saucer was deafening in the quiet room. You speak of shifting as if it were a parlour trick, Mrs. Rosecliffe. It is a biological imperative. A weapon. Madeline buttered toast, her hand steady despite the flutter in her pulse. A weapon is useless if the wielder trips over his own feet, Your Highness. Lucas has excellent instincts, but his centre of gravity is all wrong. Frederick, standing by the sideboard, looked as if he might faint. No one corrected the king. No one offered tactical advice on lycanthropy to the Alpha of the North. Maxwell stared at her. For a long moment, the air crackled. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. That would be too generous. But it was the ghost of one. Perhaps, he rumbled. Or perhaps he simply has his mother's clumsiness. The mention of the late Queen sucked the air out of the room. Era froze. Lucas looked down. Madeline didn't flinch. Then he is lucky, she said softly, to have a piece of her still moving in the world. Maxwell's gaze snapped to hers, sharp and wounded. But before he could respond, the heavy double doors of the dining hall swung open. How touching, a voice drawled, smooth as oiled silk. Domestic bliss in the house of monsters. I hardly recognized the place. A man strolled in. He was beautiful in the way a poisonous flower is beautiful. Golden hair, sharp features, and a smile that didn't reach his predatory green eyes. He wore a suit that cost more than Madeline would earn in a lifetime, and he moved with the arrogant swagger of a man who owned the room. Maxwell was on his feet instantly, the chair screeching backward. A low, vibrating growl emanated from his chest, deeper and more dangerous than anything Lucas had ever produced. Adrian, Maxwell said, the name sounding like a curse. You were not summoned. Cousin, Adrian Morecrest replied, bowing mockingly. Since when does family need a summons? I heard rumours of a new keeper for your delightful aberrations. His green eyes slid to the twins, filled with cold disgust, before landing on Madeline. And I had to see how long this one would last. Madeline stood, instinctively moving between Adrian and the children. She didn't know this man, but her skin crawled. He smelled of expensive cologne and rot. I am not a keeper, Madeline said, her voice ringing clear in the high-ceilinged room. And these children are not aberrations. They are iron shores. Adrian's eyebrows rose. He looked at Maxwell. She has a tongue on her. Charming. Does she know she's defending a sinking ship? The council is restless, Maxwell. They wonder if a man who cannot control his own pups is fit to lead the pack. Get out, Maxwell snarled. His hands were fists at his sides, the knuckles white. I'm afraid I can't, Adrian sighed, pulling a folded document from his jacket. Official council business. I am to observe the household until the winter solstice, to assess the stability of the heirs. If they are deemed a danger to the secrecy of our kind. He let the sentence hang, a guillotine's blade waiting to drop. Well, let's just say, guardianship can be reassigned. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. Guardianship reassigned. That meant taking the children. Maxwell moved so fast he was a blur. He pinned Adrian against the wall, his forearm against the man's throat. If you look at them wrong, Maxwell whispered, the sound terrifyingly intimate, I will tear your throat out. Council laws be damned. Adrian choked, but he was still smiling. And prove me right. Go ahead, King of Ruins. Make my case for me. Maxwell roared, a sound of pure frustration, and shoved Adrian away. He turned to Madeline, his eyes wild, The blue ice fractured by panic. "Take them upstairs," he commanded. "Now." Madeline didn't argue. She ushered the pale, trembling twins out of the room. But as she closed the doors, she looked back. Maxwell stood alone in the center of the vast hall, his chest heaving, while Adrian straightened his tie, watching him with the patience of a vulture waiting for a wounded animal to fall. The arrival of Adrian Morecrest cast a pall over the manor. He was everywhere, lounging in the library, watching the children's lessons with a critical sneer, whispering in corners with Frederick. He was a constant, suffocating pressure. To counter the gloom, Madeline threw herself into the preparations for the winter solstice. It was the most sacred night of the year for the wolf shifters, the longest night when the moon was closest to the earth. "We need lights," Madeline declared 3 days before the solstice. She stood in the center of the great hall, which was currently as festive as a crypt, and greenery, and music. Theodora looked skeptical. "The king has forbidden celebrations since the tragedy." "The king is currently in his study brooding," Madeline said, hoisting a box of dusty ornaments she'd found in the attic. "And I am currently trying to keep 2 children from shifting out of sheer anxiety. We are decorating." She enlisted the twins. They dragged boughs of evergreen in from the forest, filling the stone halls with the scent of pine and life. They strung lights around the grand staircase. Even the stone gargoyles got wreaths. Late that evening, Madeline was atop a ladder in the library, trying to hang a silver star on the highest shelf, when the ladder wobbled. She gasped, bracing for the fall, but strong hands gripped her waist, steadying her. "You have a habit of putting yourself in precarious positions, Mrs. Rosecliffe," Maxwell's voice came from below. Madeline looked down. He was holding her, his face upturned. The harsh lines of stress that usually bracketed his mouth were softer in the firelight. "Someone has to reach the high places," she said breathlessly. Maxwell didn't let go as she climbed down. When her feet touched the floor, she was standing in the circle of his arms. The heat of him was overwhelming. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly, gesturing to the garland-draped room. "You know Adrian is watching. You know he wants us to fail." "Because darkness feeds fear, Maxwell," she said, using his name without thinking. "And light fights it. The children need to know that the night doesn't last forever." Maxwell stared at her, his gaze intense and searching. He reached out, his thumb grazing her cheekbone. His touch was rough, calloused, but incredibly gentle. "You are a strange creature. You fear nothing." "I fear everything," Madeline whispered, her heart hammering against his chest. "I fear failing them. I fear the cold." "You are the fire," he reminded her, echoing her words from the nursery. "I have never known warmth like you." He leaned in. The distance between them vanished. Madeline's breath hitched. She could smell the snow on his skin, the pine, the underlying scent of wolf. It was intoxicating. But then a shadow fell across the doorway. "Interrupting something?" Adrian leaned against the frame, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Maxwell pulled away instantly, the mask of the alpha slamming back into place. But for a second, Madeline saw the loss in his eyes. "We were discussing the solstice protocols," Maxwell said coldly. "Of course," Adrian smirked. "I'm sure the placement of mistletoe is a matter of national security. By the way, cousin, I've invited a few council members to the ball tomorrow night. They're eager to see the progress." "There is no ball," Maxwell said. "There is now," Madeline interjected. Both men looked at her. She smoothed her skirt, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "If they want to see the heirs, let them look. We have nothing to hide. Let them see the Iron Shore pack standing tall." Maxwell looked at her, stunned. Then a slow, fierce pride burned in his eyes. He looked back at Adrian. "You heard the lady?" Maxwell said, his voice ringing with renewed power. "Prepare the ballroom, Adrian, and try not to choke on your ambition." Adrian's smile faltered for the first time. He toasted them mockingly and left. Once he was gone, Maxwell turned to Madeline. "A ball? We haven't hosted a ball in a decade. The children. What if Era loses control? What if Lucas shifts?" "Then we handle it," Madeline said firmly. "Together." Maxwell took her hand, bringing it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, a courtly, archaic gesture that made her knees weak. "Together," he vowed. The night of the solstice arrived, draped in velvet and diamonds. The ballroom, closed for years, was transformed. Candles floated in the air, a bit of Era's controlled magic, and the evergreen boughs scented the air. Madeline wore a dress she had reworked from an old gown found in the attic, a deep midnight blue velvet that hugged her curves and fell in soft ripples to the floor. When she entered the room, the gathered crowd of local shifters and minor nobility fell silent. But she only had eyes for Maxwell. He stood at the dais, wearing the ceremonial furs of the Alpha King. He looked regal, terrifying, and breathtaking. When he saw her, he descended the steps, ignoring the whispers, and offered her his arm. "You look," he struggled for the word, "vital. You clean up nicely yourself, Your Majesty," she teased, though her stomach was in knots. The twins were behaving perfectly. Lucas, in a miniature tuxedo, was charming the elderly wolf matrons. Era, wearing a dress of silver lace, was dancing with Frederick, laughing. It was going too well. The council members, grim-faced men and women in grey, watched from the sidelines. Adrian stood with them, whispering. Halfway through the night, the music stopped. Adrian stepped onto the dais, tapping a spoon against a crystal glass. "Friends, family, pack," Adrian announced, his voice carrying effortlessly. What a marvellous display, a true testament to Cousin Maxwell's rehabilitation efforts. Maxwell stiffened beside Madeline. "What is he doing?" "However," Adrian continued, his smile sharpening into a blade, "while the children seem charming, true stability is built on truth, and there is a rot in this house, a deception." Madeline's blood ran cold. "Lily. Did he know about Lily?" Adrian pointed a finger, not at Madeline but at Maxwell. "The king claims to be the guardian of these children," Adrian boomed, "but the ancient laws of the Ironshore state that an alpha who cannot shift cannot lead. And we all know, Maxwell Ironshaw has not shifted since the night his wife died." A gasp rippled through the room. Madeline looked at Maxwell. He was frozen, his face ashen. It was true. She realized then why she had never seen his wolf, why he patrolled in human form, why he was so obsessed with control. His grief had broken his wolf. "A king without a wolf is no king at all," Adrian shouted. "I challenge for the Alpha title, by the right of tooth and claw." The crowd erupted. The right was ancient, brutal combat. "He can't shift," Lucas whispered, tugging on Madeline's dress. "He'll die." Maxwell stepped forward. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who had known this moment was coming for 5 years. "I cannot shift," he admitted, his voice hollow. "But I will not yield my children to you." "Then you will die in human skin," Adrian sneered. He began to strip off his jacket. His body contorted, bones cracking, fur sprouting. In seconds, a massive golden wolf stood in the center of the ballroom, snarling, drool dripping from its jaws. Maxwell stood alone, a man in a tuxedo facing a monster. "No!" Madeleine screamed. She ran forward, but Frederick held her back. "Maxwell, don't!" Maxwell looked at her one last time. His eyes were full of apology, full of love. The golden wolf lunged, but before the jaws could snap around Maxwell's throat, a small, silver blur shot across the room. "Leave him alone!" Era shrieked. The little girl didn't use ice. She threw herself between her father and the wolf. and as she did, the air didn't freeze. It shattered. A blast of raw, concussive power knocked the golden wolf backward, sending Adrian skidding across the polished floor. The room fell deadly silent. Era stood trembling, her eyes glowing a terrifying, blinding white. The power was too much. Cracks were appearing in the marble floor beneath her feet. She was a bomb about to go off. "Era," Maxwell whispered, stepping toward her. "Stay back," Adrian roared, shifting back to human form, naked and bleeding. "The girl is a weapon. She's feral. This proves it. They must be destroyed." The council members were murmuring, nodding. They looked at Ira with fear, not pity. Madeline broke free from Frederick. She didn't run to Era. She ran to Maxwell. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "You have to shift," she hissed. "I can't," he choked out. "The grief. It locked the door." "Then open it," Madeline cried, tears streaming down her face. "Not for the crown, not for the pack, for her. Look at her, Maxwell. She is protecting you. She needs her father, not a king. She needs the wolf to teach her how to be one." Maxwell looked at his daughter, vibrating with lethal energy. He saw the terror in her eyes. Something inside him shattered. Not the ice this time. The lock. A sound tore from Maxwell's throat, a roar that shook the chandeliers. It was a sound of pure, primal love. His body arched. The sound of breaking bones filled the silent room. Madeline stepped back, breathless. Where the man had stood, a creature of nightmare and majesty erupted. A wolf the size of a warhorse, black as the void between stars, with eyes of burning blue ice. The Ironshore Alpha had returned. And he was angry. The ballroom was no longer a place of celebration. It was an arena. The orchestra had fled, their instruments abandoned like driftwood, and the air smelled of ozone, pine, and the coppery tang of impending violence. Maxwell, the midnight storm, the Alpha of the North, didn't roar again. He circled Adrian with a silence that was far more terrifying. He was massive, a shadow made flesh, his fur absorbing the candlelight while his eyes burned with a blue fire that promised annihilation. Adrian, in his golden wolf form, snarled, snapping his jaws at the air. He was younger, faster perhaps, but he fought for ambition. Maxwell fought for blood. "Don't look," Madeline whispered, pulling Lucas and Era into the shelter of her velvet skirts. "I have to," Lucas whispered back, his voice trembling but his amber eyes wide. "He's fighting for us." Adrian lunged. It was a blur of gold and teeth, aiming for Maxwell's throat. But the black wolf moved like smoke. Maxwell dropped his shoulder, catching Adrian in midair and slamming him into the marble floor with a force that cracked the stone foundation. The sound was a wet thud that vibrated in Madeline's teeth. The council members gasped, stepping back as the two beasts rolled, a tangle of fur and fury. Tables were smashed to kindling. The Christmas tree toppled, ornaments shattering like frozen tears. It wasn't a duel, it was an execution. Maxwell was relentless. He took a bite to the flank that drew blood, staining his black fur crimson. But he didn't falter. He used his weight, his experience, pinning Adrian beneath him. With a growl that sounded like the earth splitting, Maxwell clamped his jaws around Adrian's neck. He didn't bite down, not yet. He held him there, the pressure immense, waiting. The golden wolf whined. It was a high, pathetic sound of submission. Adrian went limp, baring his throat. Maxwell released him and stepped back, shaking his massive head. He looked at the council, his muzzle stained with his cousin's blood, and let out a short, sharp bark. "I am the king!" Adrian shifted back, naked, bruised, and gasping for air on the ruined floor. You should have killed me," he wheezed, clutching his throat. Maxwell didn't shift. He couldn't yet. The adrenaline was too high. He simply looked at Adrian with profound pity. Then Madeline moved. The room held its breath as the human woman walked across the debris-strewn floor toward the monstrous black wolf. Frederick made a noise to stop her, but she ignored him. She walked up to Maxwell, whose hackles were still raised, his body vibrating with lethal energy. She didn't reach for his head. She reached for his wounded flank. "You're bleeding," she said softly, her voice cutting through the silence. She took the silk scarf from her neck and pressed it against the wound. The black wolf froze. He turned his massive head toward her, his ears flattening. The blue fire in his eyes softened, dimming into a deep, oceanic calm. He leaned into her touch, a beast who could crush mountains, seeking comfort from a woman who had nothing but her hands. "The rite is concluded," Madeline announced, turning to the stunned council. Her voice didn't waver, though her dress was ruined and her hands were bloody. "The king remains. Now get a doctor, and get this traitor out of my sight." Theodora Kingswell stepped forward, a rare, fierce smile on her face. "You heard the lady," she barked at the guards. "Remove him." As they dragged a cursing Adrian away, Maxwell's form began to blur. Bones cracked and reshaped. A moment later, Maxwell Ironshaw lay on the floor, human again, shivering and naked. Madeline was there instantly, pulling the heavy velvet curtains from a nearby window to cover him. She cradled his head in her lap, brushing the sweat-damp hair from his forehead. "I did it," he rasped, his eyes struggling to focus. "I opened the door." "I know," Madeline wept, her tears falling onto his scarred chest. "I knew you could." "For you," he whispered, before darkness took him. For them. The days following the solstice were a blur of hushed voices and the smell of medicinal herbs. Maxwell's fever raged, a side effect of shifting after 5 years of suppression. His body was rebuilding itself, knitting bone and muscle back into the shape of a warrior. Madeline didn't leave his bedside. She slept in the chair, waking every hour to cool his brow or coax water between his cracked lips. But while the king slept, the wolves encircled. The council was not satisfied. Adrian was gone, exiled to the southern wastes, but his poisonous words remained. They had launched an investigation into Madeline. "They are digging, Mrs. Rosecliffe," Frederick warned her on the 3rd day. He looked exhausted, polishing his glasses frantically. "They are looking into your past, your finances, your family." Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. "What have they found?" "Nothing yet," Frederick said. "But they are thorough. If there is anything you are hiding, tell the king before they do." She looked at Maxwell, sleeping fitfully in the massive bed. He had just fought a war for her. He had broken his own curse. How could she tell him that she had lied by omission from the very first day? That she had a daughter, Lily, hidden away in a crumbling apartment with her sister, because she was terrified that a single mother wouldn't get the job. That she was afraid the monster would hurt her own child. It felt like a betrayal now. He had trusted her with his heirs, and she hadn't trusted him with her truth. Maxwell woke on the 4th morning. The fever broke with the dawn. He opened his eyes and saw her standing by the window, watching the snow fall. "Madeline." She turned, a smile lighting up her tired face. "You're back." "I never left," he murmured, sitting up. The sheet fell to his waist, revealing the fresh pink scars on his ribs. "Come here." She went to him, sitting on the edge of the bed. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. The calluses on his palm scraped against her skin, a sensation she had grown to crave. "The council is demanding an audience at noon," Maxwell said, his voice grave. "They want to discuss your position." "I know," she said quietly. "I intend to tell them that your position is permanent," Maxwell said, his eyes locking onto hers. "That you are not just the nanny, that you are vital. To the pack. To me." Madeline's heart soared and shattered in the same beat. He was going to claim her. "Maxwell, wait!" she started, panic rising. "There is something—" The heavy oak doors swung open. It wasn't the council, it was Theodora. And she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a council elder, a woman with steel-grey hair and eyes like flint. And holding the elder's hand was a small girl with messy pigtails and a coat that was 2 sizes too small. "Lily," Madeline breathed, standing up so fast the chair toppled over. "Mommy!" The little girl broke free and ran across the room. Madeline caught her, burying her face in the smell of cheap strawberry shampoo and childhood. She held her daughter tight, staring over Lily's shoulder at Maxwell. Maxwell was frozen. He looked at the child, who had Madeline's eyes and chin, and then at Madeline. The betrayal on his face was worse than Adrian's teeth. "This is the deception Adrian spoke of," the elder announced smugly. "Mrs. Rosecliffe has a child, an illegitimate human child she concealed from the crown. She is a liar, and a liability." Maxwell stood up, ignoring his injuries. He walked toward them. The elder stepped back, but Maxwell wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Madeline. "You have a daughter," he said, his voice flat. "Yes," Madeline whispered, clutching Lily. I needed the job. I was broke, Maxwell. I was about to lose everything. They told me you were a monster. I couldn't bring her here, not at first." "And later?" Maxwell asked, the hurt bleeding through the anger. "When you slept in my arms, when you sang to my children, did you still think I was a monster then?" "No," Madeline sobbed. "I thought you were a king. And kings don't marry the help. Kings don't take in stray, human children." Maxwell closed his eyes. The silence stretched, agonizing and long. Lily looked up at the tall, scary man and whimpered. Maxwell's eyes snapped open. He looked down at the little girl. He saw the fear. He saw the poverty in her thin coat. He saw the same desperate survival instinct that burned in Madeline. "Is she hungry?" Maxwell asked. The elder blinked. "Your Highness, this is grounds for immediate termination." "I asked," Maxwell roared, turning on the councilwoman, "if the child is hungry." He turned back to Madeline. The ice was gone. In its place was a fierce, protective warmth. "You hid her because you are a mother," Maxwell said roughly. "Because you would burn the world to keep her safe. How can I punish you for doing exactly what I would have done?" He knelt. It was a movement of immense grace for so large a man. He was eye-level with Lily. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am Maxwell, and this is not a place for coats. It is warm here." Lily hesitated, then smiled. "You look like a giant." "I am," Maxwell agreed solemnly. "But I am a very gentle giant. Would you like to meet a boy who can turn into a puppy?" He stood up and offered his hand to Madeline. "Theodora," he commanded, "prepare the guest suite next to the nursery. Paint it yellow, like the sun." "Maxwell," Madeline choked out, You aren't sending us away?" "I am the Alpha," Maxwell said, pulling her and Lily into his arms. "I decide who belongs in my pack, and you, Madeline Rosecliffe, you are the heart of it." The elder sputtered. "But the protocol, a human child in the royal wing." "Change the protocol," Maxwell said over his shoulder, "or I will change the council." Winter did not leave Ironshore quietly. It fought, spitting sleet and wind, but eventually the sun won. 3 months had passed since the solstice. The snow had retreated to the peaks of the mountains, leaving the valley awash in vibrant green. The obsidian stones of the manor were warm to the touch. Madeline sat on the terrace, watching the chaos on the lawn. It was a chaos of joy. Lucas and a very human, very loud Lily were chasing a soccer ball. Ira was sitting under an oak tree, reading a book, but every few minutes she would lift a hand, and a gentle breeze would guide the ball away from the flower beds. Frederick sat nearby, sipping iced tea and looking remarkably relaxed. He had even stopped polishing his glasses every 5 minutes. "They are happy," Frederick noted. "They are safe," Madeline corrected. "Same thing in this house," a deep voice rumbled. Maxwell stepped onto the terrace. He looked different. The darkness that had clung to him like a second skin was gone. He wore a linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. He looked younger. He looked alive. He sat beside her, taking her hand. "The council approved the adoption papers," he said casually. Madeline squeezed his hand. "Official?" "Official. Lily is under the protection of the Crown. As are you." "I don't need protection anymore," Madeline teased. "I have a giant." "You have more than that." Maxwell turned in his chair, his expression turning serious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Madeline's breath hitched. "I have no ring of gold," Maxwell said. "Gold is soft. It bends." He opened the box. Inside lay a ring of polished iron, set with a diamond that looked like a piece of captured starlight. Iron endures. It survives the fire. It holds the stone. He looked at her, his blue eyes clear as the spring sky. "You walked into the winter of my soul, Madeline, and you planted a garden. I don't just want you to be the nanny. I don't want you to be the governess. I want you to be the queen. My queen." Tears pricked Madeline's eyes. Happy tears, warm and free. "Iron rusts, Maxwell." "Not if you care for it," he whispered. "Not if you hold it." "Then I will hold it," she whispered back. "Forever." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Down on the lawn, Lucas shifted. It was clumsy. He was still a puppy after all. But he didn't fall. He tackled Lily, licking her face, and the two of them rolled in the grass, laughing. Era closed her book and smiled, a real, true smile that reached her eyes. Maxwell pulled Madeline into his lap, kissing her amidst the scent of blooming jasmine and new beginnings. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too," she replied. "Now go tell your son to stop chewing on my daughter's sneaker." The Vampire King, who was never a vampire, but simply a man who had forgotten the sun, threw back his head and laughed. It was a loud, booming sound that echoed off the mountains, chasing the last of the shadows away. They say the north is a place where hearts freeze, where the wind sings only of loss. But if you listen closely to the wind around Ironshaw Manor today, you won't hear mourning. You will hear the sound of a soccer ball thumping against stone. You will hear a girl singing about frogs on lily pads, and you will hear the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of a pack that learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who stays when the winter comes. Madeline Rosecliffe didn't just survive the Vampire King. She woke him up. She proved that even the wildest storms can be tamed, not by force, but by a warm hand in the dark. If you believe in love that melts the ice, and second chances that bloom like spring, please like this story, subscribe for more tales of magic and romance, and share it with someone who needs a little warmth today.